Hi everybody, tonight's story is going to be Mrs. Armitage on Wheels. Mrs. Armitage was out on her bicycle. Breakspear, the dog, ran alongside. A hedgehog walked across the road. Tring, tring, went Mrs. Armitage on the bell. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a really loud horn. Mrs. Armitage bought 3 horns. They were all very loud. Beep, beep, honk, 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 went Mrs. Armitage on her horns. Then the chain came off. By the time Mrs. Armitage had got it on again, her hands were all black and greasy. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is somewhere to wash your hands. So she got a bucket of water and a towel and a soap rack with a bar of soap, and she hung them all onto the bike, and off she went with beautifully clean hands. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself as she cycled along, if it's to be looked after properly, is a complete toolkit. So she got a toolbox with spanners and screwdrivers and hammers and cans of penetrating oil, and she fixed it onto the back of the bicycle, and off she went. By now Mrs. Armitage was beginning to think about food. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is somewhere to carry a light snack. So she got a tray for apples and bananas and cheese and tomato sandwiches, and a holder for a bottle of lemonade and a flask of cocoa, and a special basket for Breakspear with bones and dog biscuits. And she fixed them all to the bike, and off they went. But by now poor Breakspear was feeling quite tired, running along beside the bicycle. You could tell because his tongue was hanging out and he was panting. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is something for a faithful dog to ride on. So she got some iron brackets and some nuts and bolts and some cushions, and she made a seat for Breakspear, and off they went. They had stopped beside the road for some sandwiches and dog biscuits when it began to rain. Oh, great heavens, said Mrs. Armitage. What this bike needs, Breakspear, is something to keep the rain off. So she got 2 umbrellas, one large, one small, and she fixed them up on the bicycle, and off they went. Riding through the rain, Mrs. Armitage began to feel rather downhearted. What this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a bit of cheerful music. So she got a transistor radio cassette player and a lot of cassettes of cheerful music and a mouth organ so that she could join in, and she fixed them all to the bike, and off they went. Mrs. Armitage was turning the pedals so fast and blowing the mouth organ so hard that soon she was nearly exhausted. Oh, what this bike needs, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, is a bit of extra oomph. And so she got some wood and some ropes and some tarpaulin. She rigged up a mast and a sail, and she added a few yards of bunting and an anchor into the bargain. And off they went with the wind behind them, faster and faster and faster, until clash, crunch, clang, clatter, thud. Oh, what this bike needs, Breakspear, said Mrs. Armitage as she picked herself from the wreckage, is taken to the dump. And what I need is whoopee! But what these roller skates need, said Mrs. Armitage to herself, what these roller skates really, really need is... Have you got any ideas of what the roller skates need? Thanks for listening.